Awaken! The age of Necrons is nigh!
The Necrons have indeed arrived to Warhammer 40k Battle Sector as this game's first add-on faction. They came alongside a free update which added a new gameplay feature called Planetary Supremacy. So I'll talk about both of these things, seeing as how this new game mode offers a great way of experiencing the new faction. The Necrons are a robotic race of ancient beings who, tens of millions of years ago, decided to eschew their organic nature to instead become immortal, as robots made of living metal. The reasons and circumstances around this decision are much too convoluted for the scope and subject of this video, like any other piece of Warhammer 40k lore, to be honest. Suffice to say, they decided to play the long game with the organics and buried themselves in stasis in gigantic underground tombs to wait for the inevitable heat death of the universe, pretty much. Their robot bodies all contain highly advanced self-repair systems, which allow them to regen insane amounts of damage. However, that does not make them necessarily invulnerable. Their bodies can be damaged beyond the possibilities of the self-repair mechanisms. However, that means very little to the Necrons, seeing as how they'll basically be reinstalled in a new shell, as their minds and destroyed bodies get teleported to the nearest tomb complex. Real-world influences for the Necrons obviously include things like the Terminator and ancient Egyptian culture, with a fair bit of Necron visuals featuring pyramids and obelisk-like buildings, not to mention scarabs as a unit. This self-repairing ability of the Necrons in the lore had to be a big part of their faction features in Battle Sector as well. And it is. Not only do some of your units have a 50% chance of respawning up to 2 models with half of their HP following their death, but all your units will regenerate some amount of HP each turn. Now, the rate of this regeneration is dependent on the amount of movement the unit in question does during the turn, because moving more than 3 squares increases a unit's momentum, kinda riffing on the fact that these are heavy robotic beings, and the amount of momentum a unit has increases the amount of HP it regens every turn. Both these characteristics make the Necrons very resilient, but only as long as you move them around the map constantly, which means they are not favored by an entrenched static style of play where you rely on Overwatch to soften your enemies up, much like it is with Blood Angels for instance. You can definitely still use Overwatch and should do it when the situation on the ground requires it, but in order to get the most out of the Necrons, you need to get accustomed to a style of play that makes use of tactical retreating and movements constantly in order to maximize your regeneration. And believe me when I say you will need the regeneration, because despite their formidable bodies, their weapons don't seem to be as efficient. Especially the weapons of the warrior unit, which should be the bread and butter of the army. They're kinda bad, as opposed to the death marks, who are kinda the sniper unit. They're really good when used at the correct range. The way in which I get use out of the warriors, for instance, is to have 4 units spread in a rough 4-sided parallelogram with 3 to 5 squares in between them. This way they should be able to cover each other with their weapons. The warriors are so basic that one of your hero units, the Overlord, has a 3-turn cooldown ability that will simply summon a unit of warriors with no strings attached. That's just how Necrons roll, I guess, or unbury. And it kinda makes a fair bit of lore sense, because like I mentioned in the beginning, the Necrons are entombed in giant complexes deep within planets, so having them coming out of the ground is literally kinda what happens. Oh yes, I talked about range. The optimal range is now easier to ascertain as well, because it will show up on the ground as the largest and orangiest circle, and the game will show you an ability's range wherever you plan on moving the unit. So this takes a lot of the counting game out from arranging your troops. It's a wonderful quality of life addition, which does not take away from the challenge of combat, I feel. It speeds it up a bit because you don't have to count the distance every time you plan a move. I still consider that including a campaign with each new faction add-on would not only be a great way of introducing the faction's particularities and features to players, but would also make the game a much beefier offering as time goes on. The new Planetary Supremacy feature is really great, but it still does not replace a proper story campaign in my book. And look, it doesn't have to be a ginormous 20 mission campaign like in the case of the Blood Angels. It can be a much shorter thing, 7 to 10 missions, and in case you want to keep the narrative very human focused still, you can do that, but you play as the enemies. However, my interest in campaigns as an important gameplay experience element aside, let me tell you about Planetary Supremacy. In this mode, you choose between the 3 currently available factions and enter a hex map representing the areas of a planet. During a turn of Planetary Supremacy, each faction can take 2 actions. You can claim hexes and reinforce your army. If you're feeling particularly capable, you could claim 2 hexes with the same army, but that means your second fight will likely be harder because you'll be going in with an already depleted army from the first fight. Each controlled hex will increase your army point cap. However, there are 4 hexes which offer special bonuses, so those are to be taken as soon as possible, ideally before you meet the factions. In the meanwhile, you'll be fighting the Adepta Sororitas, who aren't necessarily a difficult adversary, but there sure are a lot of them. The hexes offer a fairly diverse array of environments, considerably more varied than the Blood Angels campaign does, and that's a really good thing. Even though the gameplay mechanics are solid, seeing the same background over and over will wear you out eventually. So this is one of those things that have nothing to do with gameplay, but which affect your experience in the long run to a much larger degree than you might first consider. Each encounter is kinda like a sports match, and will end when one of the participants reaches 80 kill points. Each unit has a number of points attributed to it. Usually the more expensive a unit is, the more points it has. So the first faction to kill enough of the enemy to accrue 80 points wins the hex. Now, as opposed to a sports match, the unit you lose completely will not be in your army anymore, unless you use your next action to reinforce. As long as a unit still has 1 model alive, that unit's numbers will however be refreshed for the next encounter. This sounds pretty okay, and it is for the start of a Planetary Supremacy game. The true challenge arises when you start encountering the other factions, because they have 2 actions per turn as well, and sometimes you may find yourself fighting 3 or maybe 4 back-to-back matches without being able to reinforce. That's where the true challenge of Planetary Supremacy resides, not winning one match, but playing in such a manner that you can consistently win match after match after match, even when you can't reinforce your army. Momentarily, this is made somewhat easier by the enemy AI. I haven't played it enough to tell if each faction has its own particular AI, but I can tell you that Tyranids are extremely squishy to Necrons, at least for now, and both the Blood Angels and the Tyranids will expend unit actions to attack the Scarab units you get from using the command point ability, which is always a clear plus on your part. When you use the 1 command point ability, a sickle-shaped ship deploys 2 units of Scarabs upon the target you set on the map. When that target is an enemy unit, and honestly, why wouldn't it be? They act like in a charge attack that cannot be suppressed. So from the get-go you get 2 attacks on the target. Scarabs don't do a lot of damage, but there's 2 of them, and what they do best is to finish off already hurt units. But after that, both Scarab units still get their own action and movement points, so you can get 2 more attacks out of them. Depending on where you deploy them, you can get 4 attacks out of 1 command point and 2 more targets for the enemy to use their actions on. And since these units aren't part of your initial army point makeup, you're getting free damage and 2 free targets. It's a great deal. Maybe a bit OP, I don't know for sure. It is fairly OP currently because the enemy factions will attack the Scarabs, and that means that's damage that will preserve your core army. And now comes the extra kicker. You don't necessarily have to manually play each encounter or each match. You have an auto-resolve option on most of these matches, exception being the ones that take place on the faction headquarter tiles. It will give you a percentage chance of winning and also show you which unit you are most likely to lose, if any. This option shouldn't really be used when army scores are close or when the chances are below 85%, but it does allow you to progress much faster through some turns when you've decimated the enemy armies and can steamroll through encounters anyway. So the new Planetary Supremacy gameplay mode is really cool, but keep in mind it's in a preview period, so it's still being worked on. And Necrons are not bad either. Now I'm waiting and hoping for my favorite factions to be added, namely Chaos Marines and the Astra Militarum. But rest assured, I'll cover any upcoming factions anyway, because I really love this game. So make sure to stick around if you're interested in following the evolution of BattleSector. If you enjoyed this video, I have an entire playlist of Warhammer 40k games for you to check out, as well as a playlist of turn-based tactics games. Take your pick. Please like the video and comment that thought you had while watching it to help me with the algorithm chaos gods. I have been Stephen Ansons, I have a Patreon, have a great rest of your day, and maybe you'll see me in my next video.